All right. Hey, YouTube. It's Faz from Fazlifts. And today I want to have an open and honest discussion about reps in reserve. And I want to present to you 5 criticisms of the reps in reserve method. So let's get straight into it. Firstly, just a bit of a recap of what we're talking about when we discuss reps in reserve. So essentially, it's this idea that we're keeping a pre-selected number of reps in the tank, okay, in any given set. So as an example, if you could manage an absolute blood and guts failure set of like 12 reps, okay, with the 13th rep failing, then you might only do 10. So that's 2 RAR. Or if you could do a blood and guts set of 8, you do 7. That's 1 RAR. So, it's very close to failure. It's just the last 1 or 2 reps generally aren't done and kept in the tank. The idea being that 2 reasons mainly. One, it allows for more volume, whether that's in the session or in the week or going for longer without a deload. And secondly, it's generally safer. Just anecdotally speaking, most of my major injuries were in those final few reps where I typically should have stopped and put the weight down and moved on. So that's reps in reserve, so we know what we're talking about and kind of why people do reps in reserve. So now I want to present to you 5 criticisms of the reps in reserve method. The first one is probably, I would say, the most major criticism, and it comes with a lot of emotion. So it's this: you're afraid of working hard. That's the biggest one that I've seen. You're afraid of working hard. You want to overcomplicate things rather than just busting your ass. That tends to be the big thing. So in terms of just working that one out, I would sort of ask people to consider, why are we doing training? Why are we training? So none of us are NBA athletes where sort of sacrifice is everything and we have to just win at all costs. We all have families, lives, jobs, etc. And if we can sacrifice a little bit of intensity, like maybe 1 or 2 of those reps for more volume, then that's a pretty good trade-off. If you can reduce a lot of mental and nervous system fatigue by just stopping short of those reps, which are super stressful and they cause you proportionately more fatigue, then it's pretty good going. It's not a bad trade-off. Just bear in mind why you're doing this. Like if somebody online is telling you have to go to failure, and if you don't, you're afraid of working hard, and you experiment with maybe keeping 1 or 2 reps in the tank and doing some more volume, and it works out well for you, then congrats, keep at it. Don't feel shamed into going back. I think some content consumers, I've only been on YouTube for a very short amount of time, but I'm just sort of speaking from my experience. Some content consumers, like audience, they have this weird kind of parasocial relationship with their favorite influencer, whereas they log in to YouTube, they get told they're a failure, they get told they need to work harder, and they're happy with that. They think great, and it motivates them. I don't really understand that. I don't get it. That's not what I try and do on my channel, but there are channels which really push that, and people enjoy it. They keep coming back and they think it's motivating and stuff, which is fine. But then potentially we're maybe being steered in the wrong direction for emotional reasons rather than looking at things for logical reasons. So the whole "you're afraid of working hard," I don't think that really stands up as a criticism. So that's criticism 1. Next up, actually just going back to that one. Yeah, another reason why I don't think it stands up is, like, I've been coaching now for many years. It's generally not the lack of hard work for my clients that does it if they're not making progress. It's generally going to be other factors like food, sleep. Maybe we need to adjust the routine, add more volume perhaps, or whatever, maybe reduce volume. But it's generally not the hard work. For people who are actively interested in going onto YouTube, searching for information, or hiring a coach, or just being interested more than just going to the gym and turning up, they're generally working hard enough. I can safely say that. And bear in mind, I competed in powerlifting for many years, bodybuilding, strongman. I'm not out there seeing the audience that I interact with on a regular daily basis, I'm not seeing them not working hard enough. And also, if we're saying that everyone who doesn't go to failure isn't working hard enough, then what about the masses and masses of powerlifters who stay 2 reps, 3 reps, 4 reps away from failure consistently? They're getting big and strong. So that argument just doesn't hold up. So I think we need to move past that. This whole idea that reps in reserve is just for, I think that's a bit of silly bravado. So anyway, moving on. Next thing is you can only judge failure. I see this a lot as well. So people will say, look, I don't know what 2 RIR is or 3 RIR is, and neither do you. You can only judge going to failure or not. This was famously said by Dorian Yates years ago. And Dorian Yates is, I mean, he's not the thinking man's bodybuilder, let's say. But it's just not true. Again, in my experience, it's just not true. If I ask somebody to give me 1 or 2 reps and fail, they can pretty consistently do it, maybe with a bit of fine tuning, but in general, they can do it. I don't have any clients who I've told, okay, give me 1 or 2 RAR, and they can't get it within a session or 2, honestly. And I've been coaching years. It's not that difficult. I think the difficulty with this kind of sentiment usually comes from YouTubers who just don't want to change. So I just don't see it as being true. It's a very large, brash statement, but in my experience, it's just not true. I think you should have some confidence in people. Like, if you believe YouTube, then every one of you guys watching now, you don't train hard enough, and you can't judge 2 RAR. Like, it's just weird. It's just weird. You log onto YouTube, you basically get told you're a failure, you can't judge, you can't train hard, and also you don't really know what you're doing. And people are like, yeah, great, this is fantastic information. I don't know. I'm just saying I don't see it. So I don't have any clients right now who can't judge RAR pretty well and who aren't reaping the benefits of that, if that's what I want them to do. So again, I think it boils down to that weird parasocial relationship, because you have these YouTube influencers who say these things like you can't judge failure, you're not working hard enough, but I think they have their own reasons for why they say that. And I'll cover that at the end. But let's go to the third criticism. Third criticism is you can't judge 1, 2, or 3 RAR. So it's actually quite easy to execute. Now, you get a bit of wiggle room when it comes to this stuff. Generally, if you're kind of starting off a training block or like a new routine or whatever, just go and have a decent session. Try not to go take everything to failure, maybe leave a few reps in the tank. And then as you add weight week by week, your RAR will naturally come down. Like, it's not hard to do. It's really easy to do. So if you start with, say, a 100 kilo bench for a set of, 12, and for you that's 3 RAR, great. Go to 1 or 2.5 next week, and your RAR will just slowly come down. It has to. And over the course of that first training block, well, you have an idea of where you're at. It's really simple to execute. It's not hard. Practically speaking, it's not hard. So you'll get a lot of people who want to put you off before you've even tried. Yeah, I don't know. In my experience, it's not that difficult. People just aren't that. You have to give people more credit. If you just tell people, look, you don't train hard enough, you can't just train to failure, and you brainwash them into believing that, well, you're not enhancing their efficacy. So in my experience, I just don't see that. I see people quite able to judge RAR. I see people quite able to train hard. That's generally not why they're failing. They're usually failing for, if they do fail, is for other reasons like food intake, sleep, stress, stuff like that. Anyway, fourth criticism. So far, nothing's really stuck. This one I heard recently, and it was some guy on YouTube who is an IFBB pro. He said, you're not an athlete, so that's why you don't need to do RAR, because if you're an athlete, you need to moderate your training. But as a bodybuilder, all you're doing is bodybuilding. Now, there was probably a bit of confirmation bias here, because this guy is an IFBB pro bodybuilder. That's his whole life. So, whereas I imagine if you're watching my channel, and me included, you're not an IFBB pro bodybuilder. You have a life, you have a spouse, you perhaps have kids, you have a job, maybe 2 jobs. You're wanting to be in a gym because you're wanting to get some benefit without trashing yourself, so you can't actually operate well for the rest of your life. So I don't really buy this either. Like the fact that you're not an athlete, so you can just go all out, doesn't really hold up. Yeah, sure, we're not athletes, but we have lives to live. We have jobs to do. We're trying to be productive. There are many other things in life to enjoy, like going out in the park for a lovely day, hanging out with your friends, with your spouse, whatever. So I don't really buy that. And secondly, I'll also say, even athletes aren't blowing their loads straight away. So you imagine if you're a football player, right, and you've got 2 hours of practice. Do you really think like David Beckham or Cristiano Ronaldo is just going to blow their load in the first 20 minutes and then they're just stuck for the remaining 2 hours? It's not going to happen. Like they moderate themselves. And it's the same when you're taking the RIR approach, because you don't want to blow your load in that first exercise of the day. Go on for a bit longer. And I had this conversation with a client recently who was training a little bit too hard. If you're watching, Imran, hey, my man. And he was saying, look, coach, if I go all out, what happens is I might get 1 or 2 more reps in the first set, but actually for the rest of the workout, I'm trashed. And I might even have to lower the weight and do down sets. And I'm like, dude, I understand. Keep a couple of reps in the tank and you'll have a higher overall level of volume. And so we worked it out. He's now training a little bit further away from failure and he's kicking ass. He's doing really well, actually. Shout out to him. So when it comes to bodybuilding, volume is really important. If you just handicap yourself by handicapping your performance after the first exercise, or even the first set of the first exercise, you're not going to be able to do the rest of the session justice. Generally, what I see is the ones who constantly talk about training to failure all the time, they have a lot more crappy sessions over a lifetime. They either burn out or they get hurt or they can't sustain the performance. It's not sustainable for most people. And I'll cover that a bit more at the end. So that's the fourth criticism. Again, doesn't really hold up. Last one is, it's the final reps that count. This is a very, very large assumption. So I've heard this before. You got to remember, where I come from, I'm sure I've mentioned it before. Dorian Yates' original Temple Gym was about an hour away from where I am. So there's a whole sort of cloud of Dorian, his influence around this whole area. And a lot of people will say this. They'll say it's the final reps that count. So the final 1 or 2 reps are worth more than the whole set. And in recent years, that's been even more exaggerated. And people have said things like, the rest of the set is actually worthless. I think Arnold said something like this, it's the final reps that count, or I only start counting when the reps get hard, something like that. But again, that's a very big statement. It's a very big assumption. It hinges on saying that the rest of the set, the preceding reps, were not only worth less, but also were completely pointless, which I think just isn't true, because if that was true, well, we wouldn't see built muscular powerlifters. Like, rest his soul, that's KK. I mean, he doesn't look like he's missing muscle. And obviously the people always talk about steroids, but I mean, this happens in natural powerlifting, natural bodybuilding as well. So there are plenty of people building lots of muscle without taking any sets to failure. So that just doesn't, it's just not true. It just doesn't hold up. It's not like this is a matter of opinion. This is just blankly false. So we can't say that. It's not true. We could maybe try and present the argument that the reps closer to failure are worth more, which I think is true. But then if they're creating such a huge amount of fatigue, which is preventing you from finishing the rest of the session on a high or making you deload much more often, then you're missing out on valuable training time. And I think most decent bodybuilding coaches will agree, trying to maintain a average to above average level of performance for a longer period of time is better than having 1 or 2 sessions where you knock it out of the park and then you're exhausted or injured or whatever the rest of the time. So that doesn't really wash either. Now I'm going to present a couple of counter criticisms of these 5 criticisms. I think firstly, people are very much afraid of change. And I'm going to hold my hand up and say, when I first heard of Mike T's RPE system, I poo-pooed it. I didn't want to hear about it. It didn't make sense to me. It was new. It was foreign. I realized for you guys, Mike T's stuff might be like still relatively new. When I heard about it, I was already almost a decade into powerlifting, and I didn't want to hear it. It just sounded. I mean, I made all the same mistakes. I said all the same things. I was like, it sounds like you're just trying not to work hard, which is a really massively ignorant statement, because RPE, RIR, or anything where you're staying away from just pushing all out, those are terms which are used not only in bodybuilding and strength training, but across many sports like sprinting, tennis, badminton, loads of sports. So by saying that they're pointless, you're trying to poo-poo not just bodybuilding training, but so many sports and so many really good legendary coaches. It's insane if you just zoom out a little bit and look at the broad scope. I think generally people are just afraid of change, like I was. The whole, it wasn't like that back in my day type of thing, which nowadays gets conflated with all these arguments that I've sort of discussed, like the last rep counts and you're not working hard enough. I think a large part of what I see with the older guys around here where I live, they'll say the younger guys don't train hard. They're not willing to train hard. They're not willing to diet. And they'll go off on this massive rant. And they're like, those are the guys who train with Dorian, they're in their 60s and whatever. And it's the whole back in my day kind of thing. But it's their criticisms are mixed in with the whole generational thing, which every generation has of back in my day, it wasn't the same. And I'm sure for you younger guys who are watching, you probably get that from your older generations, even the older guys, because I know I did when I was younger. I got the same things from my parents. Like, wasn't like that back in our day. Every generation does that. I read a book once, which predated. It was like over 2,000 years old. It was from ancient Greece, and there was somebody in that book talking about how this happens generation to generation. So you can imagine that happened over 2,000 years ago. It's still happening now. It's just a human psychology thing, but that gets conflated with this style of training. So people say, you know what, it wasn't like that back in my day. And then they say people are afraid to work hard, all that kind of stuff. So it all ends up being this big muddled mess. My second kind of criticism is it's really, really easy to see where people are going wrong, to see if they're working hard enough. You just get them to an AMRAP. That's it, really easy. AMRAPs are a really good evaluation tool. So it's dead easy. If you think to yourself, look, you know what, this guy is not training hard enough, get him to an AMRAP. See what happens. Do we see rep drop-offs afterwards? Do we see a decrease in performance? Does his reps start to slow down towards the end? All these things we can evaluate. So it's not like it's hard to see whether a guy's training hard enough or whether he's taking it to 1 or 2 RAR. So a couple of my kind of criticisms. Okay, now I want to just end with my own experience as a coach. Now, anecdotally speaking, the guys who tend to respond well to training to failure for long periods of time and don't get burnt out tend to be people who are like either slower twitch or hard gainers or like long distance runners, stuff like that. When I see fast twitch chads, like former sprinters, stuff like that, those are the guys who usually need to stay away from training all the way to failure. Or they need to moderate themselves massively, like take a lot of rest or eat a lot of food, like get very overweight, or take a lot of drugs. The guys who tend to work well and continuously well for long periods of time without getting hurt, without burning out, they tend to be the more slower twitch people. You know, the type of guy who, when you think he's done on a set, he'll do like 5 more. Like, they're fine. They're fine going to, failure for the most part. But there are guys like me where once I start to grind, I just go. Like, my background is powerlifting. And even though my background's powerlifting, when I first got into powerlifting, I was very, very explosive, very, very fast twitch. Within 9 months, I competed in my first powerlifting show. Like, I pulled 450 pounds in my first year of training. So, I was very explosive. So, and I also get a lot of comments about my rep drop-offs. So when I do a set, the next set, I tend to see a lot of drop-off in performance. So for me, that's a really clear sign I need to stay away from failure. Otherwise, it's going to affect the entirety of my workout. So I think you should experiment. Like, if you don't have a coach to work with, I think you should experiment and try and do both. try going to close to failure, try going further away from failure. The things to look for are, if you go closer to failure and your reps massively drop off, that's probably a sign you should keep a bit more in the tank. Like, I'll give you an example. For me, if I go to 0 RAR and I get a set of, say, 18, I can pretty much guarantee you my next set with sufficient rest will be like 8 or 9. I get that much drop off. And I get a lot of comments on Instagram saying, why do your reps drop off so much? I imagine that's probably why. I'm very, very fast twitch. And so just anecdotally speaking, there's no science involved in this. That's what I see with people who tend to be very fast twitch. Their reps drop off a lot. They can't handle much volume before they need to deload. And again, very true for me. When I made most of my powerlifting progress, I was training hard for 2 weeks and resting for 1. Very, very heavy rest paradigm. I didn't know what I know now. So now I moderate myself a bit more so I can train a bit longer. Whereas conversely, if you do try it, like you do try and go, say, 1 or 2 reps away from failure, and you get nothing from it, and you can just repeat your performance the next set and the next set and the next set, probably means you need to train harder. But don't view it emotionally, and don't let these coaches on YouTube tell you you're a piece of shit if you can't, because that's what they're saying. It's crazy, right? You don't train hard enough, you can't judge failure. Don't let people tell you that. You're fine. Like, I don't see it going wrong for most people. So just use that as a very simple rule of thumb. If you get a lot of rep drop off, you should probably stay further away from failure. If you don't get a lot of rep drop off, then, go for it. Push it a bit harder. You should be seeing some drop off, just a moderate amount. Now, my point here is, if you are going to just ignore reps in reserve as a modern concept in bodybuilding, fine. I don't mind. I'm not going to hold a gun to your head. My point with this video is just to get you to think. So if you are going to ignore it, do it for the right reasons. Don't do it because somebody shouted at you online and told you you're a pussy and you don't train hard enough. Do it because you've experimented with it and you haven't seen the results. Okay? I think that's fair. Okay, so some concluding thoughts. Reps in reserve might have potentially a lot of benefits. They allow for more volume. It allows you to continue to train longer without a deload, which allows you to rack up more useful volume, more stimulus. And there's less temptation to push those reps, which can be more injurious. If you're going to reject the whole methodology, then do it for the right reasons, okay? Don't do it because somebody shouted at you and told you not to. Do it for the right reasons because you've tried it. You've tried doing maybe exchanging a bit of intensity for volume. You've seen it's not for you. But yeah, you might find it feels good. Either way, if you're going to reject it, do it for the right reasons, okay? Have a proper test, a few months in a surplus, whatever, test it properly, and then see what you think. All right, folks, I am going to call it there. Hopefully you found that useful. Hopefully you found that interesting. Anecdotally, nowadays I try not to take too much to out and out failure. A lot of stuff that I video will be closer to failure, but in general, I prefer not to. I work a lot better with training away from failure. If I take a few sets to failure on the first exercise of the day, I'm that explosive, I'm that fast twitch dominant, the rest of the workout will be trashed. It is what it is. So I try not to do that anymore. It allows me to have a larger degree of overall volume, better stimulus overall, and allows me to go for longer without a deload, allows me to incur less injuries. Like, I've not been injured now for years, whereas previously when I was powerlifting, part of the issue was powerlifting, but part of it was taking too many sets close to failure. Whereas in modern powerlifting, a lot of people are told not to go anywhere near failure. They still build lots of muscle. One of my biggest, strongest clients is a powerlifter who never goes to failure. So a lot of these, and he's natural. So a lot of these arguments really fall by the wayside. So again, use it, don't use it, I don't mind, but just make a choice based on the right reasons. With that, have a nice week.